Our next speaker who's joining us is Sherine Kazim, and I'm going to read her bio because it's illustrious and long, and I don't want to miss anything. Sherine is an award-winning design executive with 20 years of experience leading teams in-house, at design studios, and within agencies. Throughout her career, she's worked at the intersection of human-centered design and technology to transform businesses through products, services, and environments. Passionate about protecting human interests, Sherine is currently an advisor to the ethics think tank All Tech is Human, which we love. And she was previously the head of design at Siberia, where she led the digital transformation initiative for the Whitney Museum of American Art, which is like across the street. That's pretty cool. We should go there afterward. Prior to that, she held agency roles as Chief Experience Officer at Wunderman Thompson, Global Managing Director at Huge, the Director of User Experience and Creative Director at AKQA. And she has also held key leadership positions in-house for Electronic Arts, Friendster, and Walmart.com. So please join me in welcoming Sherine as if she's already given the most amazing talk of her life. Woo!
Can you guys hear me? Okay. I feel like I have a lot of things in my hands. I'm gonna just one cup of coffee in, and I don't get to preview the screen, so here we go. Okay. That talk was fantastic that you gave. Thank you so much. It really was. And it was fantastic for many reasons. Not only did she have a terrific journey in all of this, but she mentioned a few key words that are music to my ears as a designer. And we're going to play a little game maybe through this, and you'll see if I get even more excited when I see the words that she said, because I was like, oh my gosh, she said the word. So just really quickly in this room, how many people here are what we would consider, I'm going to say more on the engineering side because I hate sharp lines. So like more on the engineering side, more on the design side. So show me on the engineering side of things. Okay, sweet. Anybody, any designers around? Sweet. Okay, okay, great. That actually is really helpful. So that'll, you may hear some new things. Don't be afraid to hide your face. So if you look perplexed, and then I will find you and I will explain what's happening. Because a lot of times there's a lot of new vocabulary that we use, and we want to make sure that everybody gets what's happening. So with that, I wanted to talk today about moving from CX to HX. Do y'all know what CX is? We're going to start at the beginning. Okay, so CX is customer experience, and HX is human experience. Doesn't take a big leap to see what's wrong right there when we talk about just CX. When I got hired for a job, I think like, I don't know, 4 years ago, they were like, yeah, you're gonna be the CXO of this agency and your primary purpose is gonna be looking at the customer journeys. And I was like, just the customers? It's like, are we missing a whole host of other people in this mess? And so that actually put me on my own journey to say, okay, time out. Like, it's not just about customers, we're much bigger than that. And what does that turn out to be? And so I arrived at this thing called the human experience. We're gonna talk a little bit about like how we humanize those journeys. And some of you may be familiar with journeys and what they actually look like, some may not be, but just bear with it. Like I'll show you examples of those things as we go through it, because in your careers, you're going to run into them no matter what. So it'd be good to see like just some examples or let's say approaches for the ones that I think that are the best, so that when one gets put in front of you and you're like, this doesn't make any sense, that you do something about it and you say something. Sound good? All right, cool. All right, let's get, that's enough. All right, so we're gonna cover off on 3 things today. We're gonna do some understanding of CX, defining of what HX is, and then humanizing the entire thing. And so first with our understanding of CX, this is how I describe customer experience. So imagine me at an agency in this big lady job, and I'm like, yeah, let's flick that word customer right out of here. So I said it's how humans interact with a brand as it manifests and moves through the world, and all of those words are very carefully chosen in this phrase. And that's because I truly believe that humans are bigger than customers. For us, humans represent, oh no, what's happening? Hang on 1 second, you guys. This is going to cut off. There we go. Okay, so humans are bigger than customers. For us, they represent a lot more. For some folks, they are citizens. They may be doctors. They may also be children. And all three of those things, if you look at those images again, you'll see that they are representative of different diversities, of different inclusivities. You get an idea that like this is actually far more nuanced than just calling it a customer. There's a lot more to it than that. And that's because when we look at things through an intentionally human lens, we actually begin to see things differently, right? We actually begin to look at the people behind these things rather than the capitalistic label that is put in front of them. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So when we just call them customers, what we're doing is actually reducing those human interactions more to measured transactions. And those things you're fairly aware with when it comes to measured transactions because all of you are subjected to that every day. And that is when doctors become doctors will become dollar signs, and citizens here become data points, and we have children who are basically seen as likes or sometimes dislikes. And that's not really a great way to look at people in general. And so what I would like to do, is that I would like to widen the aperture of what that means so that we understand that what makes us human are actually the interactions and the transactions coming together. It's both of those things. They're not mutually exclusive, and that is exactly why we look at experiences in a very wide way, right? So if you think about the interactions you have and you think about the transactions you have, all of those things make up the experiences. And when we talk about experiences, we're talking about everything that deals with a product, with an environment, with a service, or with the communication, right? So it's all of those things, and it's all interconnected, and it's all expansive. And I know it sounds complicated, but there's a reason why we have to look at all of these things. And so when we have those experiences, when they are positive or negative, either way, they're deeply human for us. So in this case, we've got some pretty jarring things that we're looking at here, but they're all very relevant. We're looking at my hometown of San Francisco and what they've been going through with the fentanyl crisis. We're looking at the middle part, which we all lived through, which was COVID. And of course, here on the left-hand side, the riots that didn't happen too long ago. And when we begin to remove the human side of these experiences, if you take the word human out, all of a sudden they become inconveniences. And for some of the engineers in this room, guess what? They start to become edge cases. And like, that is not what we're going after. What we want to do is address all of these things. And it allows us to take a more holistic approach, which is exactly why I think customer does not even begin to cover the things that we've been dealing with at all. And what we're really looking at is the human experience overall. Tracking, tracking. Anybody not tracking? Sweet. Okay. All right. So let's talk about defining HX now. So that gives us, by the way, I talk with my hands a lot, and so this is really hard for me. Can you guys hear me without this thing, or no? We definitely need this thing. We need this thing. Okay, that's cool. All right. So HX addresses our whole selves. This was fun for me. I was never a philosophy major. What does it mean to be human? There's a lot of information on the internet about this. But humans do have the highest level of cognition. We have the ability to experience motivation. We have the ability to create culture. There's no other thing that can do that, which is actually pretty cool. We also have the ability to tell right from wrong, usually. We also have the ability to think about alternative futures, and we have the ability to make considered choices. And all three of these things are based on one thing, which is needs, right? So like, you would never really have to tell right from wrong if there wasn't a need for it. You wouldn't have to make a considered choice if there wasn't a need for it. And this is where I get excited, because this is what she spoke about in the first talk. She mentioned needs right off the bat. And I think this is really important because I truly believe that needs are the true currency of the human experience. It is actually not money. It is not likes. It is not engagements. It's not all the stuff that get fed to you by the executives in those offices. It's actually needs. It's the stuff that's coming from the people. And that's really important that we understand that. So when we think about needs can be approached in two different ways, right? There's value, and then there's emotions. And so on the value side of things, we saw a rapid shift happen there. And we really saw it in the last 3 or 4 years. And if you look at this chart here, this was done by Bain, that consulting firm that some of y'all might have heard that name. They do things, they make a lot of charts. But here, in this particular one, if you look here at the bottom of emotional and functional, that is typically where we play. So for products and services and environments, we tend to focus on those bottom lines, and that's not a surprise, right? Can you design something that reduces effort? Yeah, we can. We can remove barriers to make people get from point A to point B quickly. Can you do things that make money? Yeah, we can put add-ons and bundles and all that sort of thing. So this is where we tend to play. And honestly, after 20 years, I thought I had it down. I was like, yeah, design doesn't need to be solved. It's been solved. We're good. Here we go. And then this incredible thing happened. And then our whole world got thrown for a loop as designers. And I think people don't realize how difficult that was for design overall. I mean, it was difficult for everybody as individuals and as people and as humans. But I think when we looked at some of the products and services and environments we had to deal with, things went upside down. And that's because all the emphasis used to be on functional. All the emphasis really was about saving time, was about prices, but that was no longer the case. We started seeing a rapid shift move towards people who were far more concerned about safety and wellness and control and convenience, right? So if you think about all of you, you weren't gonna walk around that grocery store looking for the perfect roll of toilet paper. You were gonna grab the toilet paper and get the heck out of there as soon as you could, or you're gonna have it delivered to you, right? And that is a change in behavior that may not have existed before. And so that's really important for us, because that shift of behavior affecting our emotional and back and forth is something that has now begun to inform us as we continue to move forward. And even though we're calling it post-COVID, I don't think we are technically post-COVID. I also believe these experiences are cumulative, and we'll be taking some of this behavior with us in the future. It's not a bad thing at all, but it is something that we have to be prepared for. And so in this part here, HAC does acknowledge and we offer support for the emotions, right? But we never, ever manipulate those emotions, right? We are looking at some of the emotional feeling that comes out of here, which are things like fear and loathing, you hate doing that particular thing, or anticipation or grief. Those are real emotions that need to be considered. And those are only, how many did I list there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 emotions. How many emotions do you guys think we have? Go on.
Too many.
Such a good answer. So a few years ago, I gave a talk about emotions, and I was like, we have 6. On a bad day, I have 8. Turns out that's not true. We have a lot more emotions than you think. We have 32 emotions, and it looks something like this. This is Robert Plutchik's chart, which I think is quite pretty. But it has all the emotions that we actually feel. And now you begin to see the complexity of what is actually happening for us as we begin to think about designing experiences, and that it's not nearly as cut and dry as it used to be. And there were some other nuances that showed up, which are things like the transition of those emotions, right? So if you think about things like a meditation app that you might be using, you're coming in potentially in a stressed form of mind. We are taking you to a much more calmer frame of mind. That is a transition of emotion that is somewhat controlled by the user, but also served up by people like myself that are trying to make sure that we are giving you exactly what you need so that you can meet your particular need and hit your goal. And then there's intensity of emotion. So we also have to address, right? Stress levels go up, intensity goes up. We have to react very quickly, but we have to be careful on how that reaction is. So if you're Walmart and Walmart says, we want to create better grocery pickup so that people can come to the parking lot to get their groceries rather than go inside, there's an intensity of emotions there. I am in a rush. I've got anxiety. I can't go inside. Give me my groceries. Get me the heck out. So you're designing that environment and that process to get the people out of there as quickly as possible. However, if you look at things like finance, when we go to think about like, I'm stressed, I need to sell my stock as quickly as possible, believe me, we're not going to do it in one click. We're going to slow down that process just a little bit because there's money that's actually being transacted and might be a great deal. So even introducing friction, there's nothing wrong with introducing friction into the experience. We often sacrifice clicks for clarity. And this allows us to make sure, though, that we are meeting the need of the user here, which is, I have these intense emotions, I'm panicked about the stock market, help me out and get me through this particular thing. Sure, friend, no problem, slow your roll. And so that's what we're doing there. Does that make sense on the emotion side? Okay, just so you know, that talk is like about 50 slides that I just did in 3. Okay, so you guys are awesome. Okay, and so then now understanding all of those things, so understanding the value and understanding the emotions, right, the two sides of what needs are, that is what we need to do in context. And that is actually what makes responsible design. And so that's what we're really trying to get to, which is how do we create responsible designs that support the user no matter where they are in the process. Tracking? Tracking. Okay. So with that, oh, great, yeah, we're done. Hello? Wait for it. Okay, that was it at the end. So now when we take all that information, so now you understand what CX is and what that perspective is, you understand what it makes to be human. Now we have to figure out how we bring these two things together in an effort to create the magic deliverable that not just one team uses, every team uses. And how does it become the best hallmark deliverable that we can do? Journeys for us are a key output of experienced designers, right? It is the way in which we speak truth to power. It is the way in which we report truth to power, and it should be a fairly neutral document. Has anybody here ever seen a journey, experienced a journey, participated in a journey, anything like that? Yeah, sweet. Okay, all right, so not a huge amount of people. All right, do you get, I have a lot of engineers, so this will be fun. You guys know what flows are, what user flows are? Bueno, okay. So when I first got started, all we had were flows. And it was just straight up like, what are the screens or the processes that the user is going to go through to get from point A to point B. That was 25 years ago. Fast forward to where I am right now. Now there's a whole bunch of other data that goes into these documents. So they're still very much anchored in a lot of the engineering flows that exist. But now we're actually adding a lot more different types of research into that so we can understand precisely what the user is going through as they go from step to step, right? Okay. So what that means then is that there are 3 kinds of research for this particular thing. And if you look from left to right, there's some that provide a little less context and then some that provide a great deal of context. So here on the left-hand side, we have desk research. And so desk research you're all very familiar with. You sit down, you start Googling, you find the things. Tends to be a lot of comparative information, tends to be a lot of competitive information. And we're just trying to get a feel for what's happening out there with other products or services. And this is always on. That side of the research is actually never done. And then in the middle, we have quantitative. And some of you may be very familiar with quantitative research because a lot of companies love to push quantitative research. They're like, but it's at scale. I'm like, it is. And so this is generally what's happening at scale. And it does facilitate analytics. And we do this primarily through surveys and social listening. It is a memory of what happened, right? The person isn't necessarily taking that particular survey right then and there. It's usually at the end of the process, they get it, or a day later they get it. Or, as I got one the other day from some like, I don't know, light bulb company, Lumens. They were like, hey, what do you think of your light bulbs? And I was like, light bulbs? And I had no idea. And it took me a while to realize it was from 2 years ago. And I thought, great, I guess, I don't know. And so, again, it's a memory. It's not a bad thing. Data's data. And then on the right-hand side, this is where my bias comes in, is qualitative research, which I'm a huge fan of. This is where we are specifically finding out about people in the moment of what they're doing, right? So we are paying attention to exactly what they're doing, recording what they're doing, and understanding what's happening there so we can capture the mindsets and behaviors of them, right? What are they seeing? What are they feeling? What are they thinking as they're going through this process? And the other thing to note is what's happening here, which is at the bottom, and how many people we deal with. So if you think about large targets for survey, they tend to be, we'd like to see 500 people per target audience, right? So like per group of folks. So like I want to talk to 500 people that identify as female, and I want to talk to 500 kids. Qualitative is a little bit different. You'll see that I have an ideal target of 8. And boy, that doesn't seem like a lot, right? And don't think for a second I don't get pushback all the time on this one. That's actually proven. There's a guy named Nielsen. He's famous. And so he's the one that actually determined that 8 is the sweet number, somewhere between 6 and 12, but 8's really the sweet number where you begin to see patterns of behavior. So if you can get to that and you can at least talk to 8 people, it is really good information to have to kick off the whole process. And I say kick off because we actually do all of these things. So we start with qualitative so that we can understand what the needs are and whatever goals they're trying to meet, whatever the issues are. And then we validate with quantitative data. And this allows us to keep any biases at bay, because otherwise I'm just going to try and push through whatever I want, or the product manager is going to push through whatever they want. And this is our way of stopping that, is by doing this combination of 2 types of research. It's important that you guys get involved with this kind of research, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we get to the end of the presentation. But that is something that I think is really important for us here. So there is another part, though, of data that feeds into these things. So we've got the qualitative data, the quantitative data, the desk research, and inevitably a team gives me audience data. So, and the problem with the audience data is that they're often based on personas. And so, do you guys know what personas are? Ish? Okay. They're gross generalizations of groups of people. That's maybe not the nicest way to say it, but that's basically what it is. So, like, they are channel driven, typically provided by marketing teams, so they can market products to you. But they're done by demographics, and they're done by psychographics, and they're done by geographics. None of that sounds terribly human to me, but okay, let's go with it. So that's a really interesting way of approaching something, but is it right for design? Well, I think when you take a look at a flaw that I found on the internet, which is, we've got these 2 royalty, these 2 royal guys, we have the Prince of Darkness and the King of England, and they have all those things in common right there. So according to marketing, demographics, psychographics, and geographics, these guys are the same guy, and they would be marketing the same way. And so here's my question. Do we think they're the same person? Do we think they behave the same way? Do we think they have the same mindset? Do we think King Charles bit the head off a bat? Maybe. But I don't know. But like, it's a really interesting thing. I think when you start looking at it this way, this is kind of a perfect example that I could find that basically says, okay, time out. This is nothing about actual behaviors and who we're designing for. So what we do instead as designers is we lean a little bit more heavily into archetypes. So if personas are based on these 3 things, archetypes are a little bit different. And you begin to see how it becomes a little bit more human. So we're leaning more into needs, we're leaning more into mindsets, we're leaning more into behaviors, and we're leaning more into actions. So it's a very different thing. And we do that because these things could actually talk to both Charles and Ozzy. I always called him Darkness. So we could actually talk to the 2 of them, right? Because they both may have the same need. I need to buy light bulbs. Great. Let's sort out how you're going to buy light bulbs. And so that's how that works there. Do you understand the difference between the 2 of those?
Can you explain archetypes a little bit more?
Yeah. So like if we think about the archetypes as being need-driven and across segments, so when we talk about segmentation, you have a giant audience, and then that audience gets segmented. And so the way, let's say that previous one here, I really wish this was better. There we go. The way this works, that would be considered a segment, right? So like white, male, born of a certain year, raised a certain way, that is a segment. And so like the persona-based folks would say, okay, we're going to serve this segment. When we think about archetypes, we're going to go across segments instead. And we're going to say, we can market to different people, men and women, across this particular thing. It doesn't just have to be men in the UK or whatever. The other thing it does, I think, is when you look at the who and the similarities, that's really what this part is based on. But if you look here, it's more about like, what do they want? When do they do it? Why are they doing it? Like, it's basically my dream as a kid that always asked why every 3 seconds. Like, this is like a dream come true for us, right? Because like, if you have a curious mindset, chances are you're gonna fall into that bucket and you're gonna wanna find out more and more about that particular person. And so archetypes help us dig into these areas through things like, if you told me that there's a spectrum of behavior, like independence. Like I like to use the web and be independent, right? Okay, that spectrum is a behavior. The opposite side of that spectrum, or the I guess not complementary, but yeah, opposite side of the spectrum would be something like I like assisted behavior. When I'm on the web, let's say I'm old and I need my niece or my nephew to help me out do that particular thing. And so we would look at those two things and say, okay, there's these kinds of people and these kinds of people. Gender doesn't matter. Race doesn't matter. Race doesn't matter. It's all behavior based. And so there's a really beautiful neutral ground, and it starts to feel really human, right? We sort of eliminate all the constructs that have been taught to us, and we start looking at just the mindsets of the behaviors. They may be influenced by culture and the way in which you were raised. However, that is not the primary way in which we're looking at it. Does that help?
That helps a lot.
Awesome. Okay. Any other questions about this one? No? Okay. So the journey, though, is actually what brings all these things together. So we talked about the needs and we talked about the value, right? Showed you the little pretty chart about the emotions, right? So you have all of that information. We talked about personas and archetypes. We talked about qualitative, quantitative, desk. Like, it's a huge amount of information to work with, and now we have to pull it all together. And so rather than pull it together in some 100-page deck, we actually pull it together in a document that allows us to build out certain things, like phases and touch points. What are they thinking, feeling, and doing, and insights and opportunities. So if we take an example again of I want to buy light bulbs, we're going to look at that particular flow. We're going to add in all of the data that basically says, okay, what's the trigger? My light bulb blew. Okay. What's the phase? Well, I got to find the light bulb, go get the light bulb, purchase the light bulb, screw the light bulb in. That's pretty good. You might do some other stuff too, but that's pretty much it, right? Okay, what are the touch points involved? Well, I might talk to a friend. I might check online. I might go to a store to see if I get a better price, like whatever, like you get that. And then what are they thinking, feeling, doing? This is where it gets like magic for me. Those areas there, the thinking, feeling, doing area for this, that is all the human-centered building blocks. What do they believe? What are the emotions? And what are the actions they're doing? The reason why that matters is that often it used to be, and remember, these things are continuing to evolve. I mentioned that like when I first started, it didn't have all this information. The reason why this is important is that often what you were thinking versus what you were doing at any particular moment, they don't match. So like if you've ever watched usability studies at all, somebody will sit there and you'll say, hey, how easy was that process? And they're like, super easy. And you're like, okay. And then you go back and you look at the tape and their eyes are darting all over the place and the mouse is moving everywhere. And you're like, not easy. And so like, that's the problem, right? It's like you're starting to see that these things don't match. And that is vital for us to make sure that we are designing the right thing at the right time and really, really observing and paying attention to the user the way we should be. And so those three things are key for us. And so here's how it begins to build out. This is one single document with tiny, tiny type. We're going to zoom in a second. But like this is a typical journey. And so if you look at this journey really quickly, I'll show you what it looks like here. Phases and triggers, thinking, feeling, doing, insights, opportunities. Yeah, so matches the same thing I just showed. So there at the top, you see the stages and motivation, phases and triggers, right? What are they doing? What are they feeling? And then insights and opportunities. And so if you look here, only because these numbers are slightly bigger, there's all your quant information. And then there's verbatims in there as well, which is your qual information. These documents, I have done them as small as like this big. And then I think I did one that was about 10 feet long. The good news is about these giant ones is that they become an undeniable source of truth. So once you put it together and we print them out and we put them up on a wall and executives have to walk by, there's no more like, well, I don't believe you, I don't believe the customer said, I don't believe you're like, look at the document. And so it forces conversation and it forces collaboration between groups that don't really need to. So we do spend time designing them. We want them to be beautiful because we want them put on display because they are a direct representation of us speaking for the people. So when we zoom in a little bit, just so you can see, any day, here we go. We also show the unvarnished truth of what's happening. So I have had people tell me not to include things in terms of the data. They'll say, did they really say that? I'm like, they really said that. We really recorded it. And then they try to take it out. I've had people eliminate data. I've had people change quotes on me and then put in like what they imagine to be like the ideal quote. Oh, well, this is really what it should look like. Half of my job is playing a cop to make sure that like that is not the case. And again, we are telling the truth the entire time because it doesn't do anyone a service if we lie about that data, right? Because if we put in the wrong data and that data gets referenced by another team or God forbid by another company or another group, you begin to see the spread of those lies continue. And like, it is our job not to do that. It's our job to tell the truth. And so here, when we zoom into one of these areas, just so you can see what we're trying to do, this is for Verizon. And so this was one that I did for them. You can see here that like, we'll put in, now I need another hand. Okay, we'll put in the quant information. We'll say 47% of the people felt X about this particular thing. Remember, it's happening in a particular phase. But then we do put in a verbatim right there so people understand. So it's like, yep. Yes, 47% of the people are saying they want to make the switch. That's cool. Yeah, this person is like, this sucks. This is like super complicated. It's not great. And then we found this at the same time was what the associate was going through. And the associate said, oh, you want information about how the taxes work? You should Google that. Okay, this is a Walmart. I mean, this is a Verizon associate. So what this shows, I think, here with the three is that you're seeing the quant data come through, you're seeing the qual data there as well, right? So you're seeing the supportive information happen right there, and then you're also getting a different perspective that's supportive, which is what's happening from the employee's point of view, right? And I think when you see all those things together, it becomes an undeniable source of truth that can be shared, and then changes can actually be made. So these documents do take quite a while to put together. In this case, with Verizon, it was a 12-week project. And 10 weeks were spent on research, including putting together this document. So it's no small task to put these things together. And so there's a lot of information to a bunch of people that don't speak design. But here's where you guys come in for all of this. There are three things that I think that would be enormously helpful for people like me. One is to insert yourselves into the process. So a lot of times what will happen is the doors get closed pretty quickly, and design owns research, or sometimes research owns research. But very rarely do other disciplines come into the room. Very rarely do we see engineers come into the room. Very rarely do we see, the more conceptual, creative folks like come into the room. But it's vital that everybody have a seat at the table, because I think if you do, then everybody understands what are the goals we're trying to meet. Do we agree on those particular goals so we can make sure that we get the actual research plan put together. The second thing is, and you heard me talk about this earlier, is to talk about that word why, what a great word it is. And if you see something and you don't agree with it, you do have a responsibility to ask why. It's a scary word sometimes to sort of challenge people with that word, but it's also vital that you do that because, again, they will try to cut some corners to sell through what they need to sell through, which means cutting data or changing the ask or whatever it is. All those little slights, they matter. And then finally, I would have you guys to help me challenge people around us on the vocabulary they're currently using. So we talked about customers moving to humans. There's a couple of other things we could do too. So back in the old days, this was like when I worked at Friendster, like I don't know how many years ago. It was, do you guys even know what Friendster is? Hallelujah. No, seriously, this guy's like shaking his head. You know MySpace? Okay, yeah, like 5 minutes before MySpace was Friendster. Bombed. So here's how things used to be seen back then. We were users Friendster was called a community site. The word social didn't exist as it related to digital products back then. And our goal was just to sort of personalize the experience to the best of our ability. Today, instead of users, we call people customers. Instead of community, we say social. Instead of personalized, we say the worst word in the world, target, which I think is the most horrific word we can use for humans. And then tomorrow, here's what I'm proposing. I'm proposing that we call people humans. So forget users, forget customers. Can we just call them humans? I believe we should change social to communal because I think it gives you a different sense of what's happening around us. And I think it builds in a little bit of collaboration in ways that we can work together and perhaps unites us instead of separating us. And then finally, instead of target, and this is a tough one, how about we say serve? How about we say we're not gonna target the audience, but how do we serve our audience? And I think again that sort of like puts us back a little bit, so it doesn't feel nearly as pointed, as aggressive as I think some of the old language used to be. My God, that was a lot. Hi.
You have time for questions?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we'll be running the mic, and we have a couple questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. It was really interesting to think about, and it was a great presentation. So I have two questions, but I guess I'll just ask one and then maybe another one afterwards, after other people go. So my first, to understand the human and how they're dealing with that. What are some tips you have for us regarding how to run those kind of qualitative discussions with humans?
That's a fantastic question. The good news is there's a couple different ways you can do that. I like to run the research myself. I like to be a part of it. I want to talk directly to consumers. A couple ways we can do that is, in the Verizon case, sometimes we lurk outside, not with a clipboard or anything, but we just kind of hang out and then we kind of approach them and we're like, hey, do you want to talk? And we do have a script in the sense that not so much like a verbatim script, but rather something that we know we have to tackle in terms of what processes that they went through to make sure we covered off on everything. But qualitative research are basically just interviews, and you're finding the people that are appropriate for the task that you want to undertake and understand a little bit more about. So those interviews can be really simple like that. So basically what we would call observation and intercepts. So that's literally lurking and then just intercepting somebody. The other ways you can do it is actually to field them through customers that might be existing currently. So for instance, when eBay first started way back in the 90s, they actually had a group of 100 people that they would constantly talk to. So as they were building the site and designing the site, they would tap into the 100 people again and be like, hey, what do you guys think of X? And then they would tell us what they thought of X. But we wouldn't talk to them all 100 at a time. We talked to them one-on-one, and that's key. So I'm not a fan of focus groups, period, at the end of that sentence. I will go down saying that for the rest of my life. And that's because that's not how people use digital products. Nobody crowds around a website. It's just let's look at Friendster, to the guy in the background who didn't know Friendster. Okay, fine, MySpace. But I do think that actually talking to them one-on-one is the way to go. And you'd be amazed at how many people want to. A lot of them will do it for free, and if you need to kick them a little bit, you kick them a little bit. We're talking a $10 gift certificate or $50 gift certificate. It just depends. The other thing I've done in the past is sometimes you have to travel to the places depending on the type of project it is, because I'm assuming, actually I shouldn't assume, are all of you just thinking about the digital world, or do any of you guys think about the physical world as it relates to digital products? So that's more integrated experiences. Yeah, a little bit. Okay, so I do a lot of integrated experiences. I've spent more time than I care to admit in the Midwest and the South. And a lot of times I have to do that because we on the coast have a very different way of understanding digital and how it works in our lives versus some folks might be in smaller towns in the Midwest or in the South. A good example of that was I used to work at Walmart.com back in 2001. I think you mentioned 2001. And during that time, we were designing, kiosks in store. Yeah, 2001, big deal. And so I was leading that charge, and we got into a fight, right? The team gets into a fight about what to do next, not uncommon. And our director said, you know what? You guys are gonna go to Missouri, okay? So we went to the middle of nowhere, Missouri, to a Walmart to go get a better understanding of whether or not we were doing the right thing, and started talking to people. So standing in the parking lot of Walmart or standing in the particular department. And one of the things we asked, for instance, is like, what should we call this thing? And like, is it called a kiosk? Is it called a center? Is it called a station? Like, all of these things matter in the Midwest, because we would just say kiosk in San Francisco. And the guy said, one gentleman we spoke with said, I don't like the word kiosk. And I said, why is that? He goes, it sounds Russian. And I just stood there, I was like, okay. It's a funny little thing, because the reason why that's important is I don't think we would have known that if we hadn't actually gone out there and spoken to customers. We tested the interfaces as well out there, and we found out that farmers' fingers are actually much bigger, their hands are actually much larger. And so when they would press the buttons on the kiosk, this digital kiosk, right, with a digital screen, the kiosks were falling over, because the bigger the bevel, the harder they thought they had to press. So we were just like, okay, that's not gonna work. So you learn a lot when you travel around. And so I highly recommend that when you talk to the customers, or you talk to the humans, or you talk to the employees, make sure it's in the right region. Make sure you're talking to the appropriate folks and not just doing what's easy or what's cheap, because in the end it'll cost the company far more money. Does that was a very long answer. Yeah?
No, that was amazing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hey there. Thanks a lot for your talk. I think this is the feedback of it. Should I say that? Yeah. Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, great. So I think the idea of jargon in computer science is really interesting, and how with all these new technologies, there's lots of new words being thrown around, and like you said, with COVID, things can change. Yeah, okay.
Simulation.
Yeah, something's happening. As we progress through, more humanistic, it seems like in a lot of technology and advancement, it's always been technological first, and then humanistic approaches, whether that's like microwave radiation or the computer, it's always been focused on like users. Do you ever see, as we move forward with more capital and social, like a humanistic thing going forward, and then the technical?
I do, although I would argue, I don't want one to be in front of the other. So like, I don't like this. I don't like one team to be out front. I want to see us all sort of lined up in the room at the same time. And I feel strongly about that, because technology brings so much to the table that it's not possible for me to know what's possible in every realm. I'm a designer, and I always will be, and I don't, I'm not a tech person, but I think to have technology there right up front, then it becomes a debate. And when you put the users in front, you're not telling them what's going to come first. They're going to tell you what's going to come first.
Quick follow-up question.
Yeah.
You know how you kind of divided the room into like engineers and designers?
Ish. Yeah.
Right? Or like you made that schism, right? Ish. Broad strokes.
Yeah.
Similar how there's like a product manager now that kind of runs the show. Do you see somewhere in the future someone kind of having both skill sets?
Absolutely. So none of you have been on my team. If you were on one of my teams, you would hear my little spiel about how important I think generalists are,
right.
And why I feel that they are the most important things if we are going to proceed with a more integrated future. I think the hard lines that existed, particularly when I was coming up in the world, was problematic because they were created for various reasons, right? I'll just speak for the agency side. I won't speak for the client side. On the agency side, we get cut up often, and they like those strong lines because they get to charge more. So a designer can't be a UX designer and a UI designer and a visual designer and a brand designer. Oh no, those are 4 designers. That's 4 different ways in which we charge. Most of the folks that I had on my last team at Siberia were all hybrids. So they were engineers and designers in one person, or they were research and design in one person, and I feel really strongly about that. I think you just get a better product in the long run. Yeah. So I wish you guys would do that. That's why, I don't know. She's got the thing. You are doing so good. You're getting all your steps in.
Hi, yes. So my question for you is, how do you guys stay accountable with your approach, because I'm sure it's not easy to be indoctrinated with the previous customer experience, or just like thinking top bottom with like everything really, like you're thinking like in a very extractive sort of mindset, and then shifting more towards like a more holistic, humanistic, as you said, mindset. So how do you and your team stay accountable to make sure you guys are still following along that path? Yeah.
Well, I think one way accountability comes into play is that we don't lock the doors, meaning it's an inclusive process. And this is why I was saying that everybody needs to get involved. I want everyone to move to the front of that process, because when we do, we evolve together. And so then it doesn't become, I'm coming in saying, forget your CX, it's going to be HX moving forward. I was still the CXO, I was not the HXO. So that should tell you something, right? But like, it was still, I think when it comes to, depending on where you fall in the organization, I think more than 50% of my job was internal education. Now, mind you, it was a large agency of 20,000 people, so I had my work cut out for me. But that is something that has to get done, because as I mentioned, just like data, if you share the wrong data and that data it spreads. If you can make your message really tight, right? So it's how humans move through the world. That is something that people can rally behind. So having that very strong vision and having people buy into that vision and participate in creating it, and then forcing that out, will actually get us there a lot faster. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for sharing. Given your breadth of experience both in-house and at an agency, I was wondering if you could compare and contrast those experiences. Where do you feel more empowered to do your best work, or what are the sort of institutional challenges at each?
Okay, yeah, that's a
fun question, right?
Holy moly. Okay, so, best part about agencies, best part, variety. The speed in which it moves, the variety of work that you get. I've worked for nonprofit organizations inside of agencies. I have worked very much for-profit Fortune 1 companies inside of agencies. I found the best data team of my life inside of an agency. So the last one, the big one, Wunderman Thompson, Wunderman was a data company, and it was part of a merger, and I didn't know anything about data, and all of a sudden I had access to thousands of data people. And that changed my life. It really did. And it changed my whole outlook and approach. So in that sense, like, I think agencies will get you a quick hit at many different things. You'll get to cover off on a lot of different industries. Downside. The downside to the agency world and the upside to going client side, whether that's profit or nonprofit, is that you get to dig in a little bit deeper. You really get to understand and fundamentally, like, get a chance to grow your skill set, get a chance to solidify with the team. There's less movement, I think, coming in and out than like an agency. Most of our projects are relatively short, 3-month, 6-month projects, whereas when you're client side, they can go on for years. So I don't know if there's like a plus or minus for that, and I go back and forth, and I feel strongly about that, but that's for me, that is a personal thing. I like to move around. I think that when we move around and we bring our experience, so like when I went from Walmart to Friendster, like that was me taking a very consumer mindset and bringing that into something brand new that's social. When I went from social, or community back then, to EA, a game company, I took that with me and said, okay, this is how we build games for people. And this is how we sell it to people, right? So it's all cumulative, I think, in that way. So I like to move around, but I think there's pluses and minuses on both sides. I would never tell you which one to go to.
Great, thanks.
Do it all.
Hi, I really love how you like emphasize the importance of language and vocabulary when we're working with things like this. And personally, I'm like someone who works at the intersection of like designers, technologists, and like humans. And I'm like, I've often found that I'm working with groups of people that sometimes have inherently different languages. So I'm always in a hassle of trying to figure out how to foster these conversations between these different groups. And I know you showed that a journey is like a very powerful way of fostering these conversations, but I'm wondering if you have any other insight into, you know, making a more collaborative and integrated environment.
Integrated and collaborative across languages or across disciplines?
Across disciplines.
Across disciplines. I mean, I don't know if I do, because I think that I do believe that what we'll never do is just come out with this document at the end and put it up on the wall. There's a lot of steps that go on in between in an effort to get people to participate. Step one of this thing, besides like saying, hey client, how much money do you need to make? The first real step of that becomes putting together what the plan is, the research plan. That's where everybody comes into play. So at that point, you're not just talking to the product manager, but you're actually talking to engineering, you're talking to design, you're talking to data. Like, what is it exactly that we need to gather in an effort to figure out what we need to design? And then, so collaboration begins right up front. I'm a huge fan of collaboration. Again, because the perspectives that are brought forth are going to be very different. You think you're going to be designing for one thing, but when an engineer approaches and says, you know what, that language is dead and everyone's moving in this direction, you're like, oh, and things begin to change, and often it changes for the better. More often than not, it's actually for the better. So I think from day one, it can be a really hard thing, I think, particularly for designers. We tend to want to hold on to things very closely. And if I could give one piece of advice today, it would be like, well, don't open it up. Just open it up to everybody, and you know, you're still going to lead. You're still going to get the credit, you're still going to get all those things, and in fact, you'll be looked at in a completely different way if you actually open up and let people participate from day one.
Thank you. So we have time for about 2 more questions. Who else has just a question? Okay.
So thank you so much for that talk, first of all. So I know the obvious best thing to do would be talking to customers directly, but I used to work as a social media coordinator, and I know that those tools like Sprout Social, Meta for Business are really helpful to supplement that, but they're still very much focused on the demographics like race, age, gender. Is there any way we as engineers can design tools like that to be more perceptive to personas and humans?
Ooh, I don't know, but I love that idea. Wait, should I ask you that? Hey,
this is the first I'm hearing of all this.
Yeah, like, no, it's actually, that's a terrific idea. I mean, and you're now sitting in a room full of engineers that probably have a lot more ideas about that than I do, but I think that's a fantastic idea. Because you're right, we have a lot of social listening tools, and those social listening tools do help complement all of the quant data that exists. But I can't exactly call somebody up, you know, on, I almost said Twitter, on X, and say, you know, hey, I saw you did this thing. They'd be like, what? So I don't even think they hold phones like this anymore. What? Yeah, but I think it's well worth exploring. Yeah, do it. I don't know. What are you doing? Do it.
Hello, thank you for the presentation, very insightful. Having taken a user experience design class, I know you don't like the word user, but I took it recently. It's very interesting to see like another approach to sort of the things we talked about. So my question is, when talking about using archetypes instead of personas, you know, it prioritizes needs instead of like demographic information. However, for like the examples of like Walmart, or from the previous presentation, like the New York City like benefit eligibility website, examples like tech literacy, cultural, regional stuff was pretty important to the process. So I wonder, what does the balance of that look like without making gross generalizations, or is it dependent on the problem / product?
Well, it depends on the need / problem / product, right? So like, can you summarize your question for me? So like, are you asking?
So using like archetypes where the needs are prioritized over using things like demographics, that kind of goes against using like the examples of Walmart or like the New York City stuff, where the things like